Today we're going to be talking about the urinary system. So every single day our bodies are carrying out lots of chemical reactions, and when these chemical reactions take place in the body, we produce waste products. An example is nitrogenous waste products from protein breakdown. So we'll produce urea overall. So the protein that's been broken down will be converted into urea. And if that was allowed to remain in our system, it would build up to toxic levels and it would be bad for our cells and our cellular processes. So we need to find a way to get rid of that toxic buildup in the cells and get rid of our waste products. And the urinary system helps with that. So I'm going to make this a large screen. So the main functions of the urinary system are removal of waste products like that toxic urea from protein breakdown. The urinary system also regulates water and salt levels within the body. It also regulates our pH levels and it helps maintain our blood pressure. So it has a lot of vital functions to help our body work the way that it does. We roughly produce 1 to 2 litres of urine per day, but actually it's roughly about 150 to 180 litres of blood is filtered through the kidneys every day, and we only produce 1 to 2 litres of waste products. And you'll see why as we go through this slide. So basically, when we think about the urinary system and its main function, think about it as cleaning your blood. So imagine having to clean out a fridge, this fridge here, for example, and some of the food is out of date and all spoiled, but some of the food is still good. So you take everything out of the fridge, the bad stuff goes into the bin, and the good stuff goes back into the fridge. That's basically what your kidneys are doing. You're basically squeezing everything out, the good stuff included, and then you reabsorb the goodies back in and get rid of the bad stuff in your urine. So that it's kind of cleaning the blood and making sure that any waste that we don't want is being expelled from the body. So here is the urinary system. We have 2 kidneys, a right and a left kidney. If you put your hands on your hips, where your thumbs kind of rest towards the back is where your kidneys kind of lie. And the right kidney is slightly lower than the left kidney to make room for the liver, the second largest organ in the body. So you can see branching off from each kidney, we have a ureter. So we've got 2 ureters because we have 2 kidneys, and these lead all the way down towards the bladder. So urine will go through a process of filtration, reabsorption and secretion, which I'm going to talk about. And then once we've got the urine ready to go and be expelled by the body, it will first travel to the bladder, a muscular organ where it's kind of just stored there, temporarily stored until it's ready to be expelled via the urethra at the bottom. So we have 2 ureters and 1 urethra. So the ureters are narrow tubes. They're roughly about 25 to 30 centimetres long, and they only have a diameter of 3 millimetres. They're continuous with the renal pelvis, which is a sort of funnel within the kidney where the urine collects. It's made up of 3 layers, these ureters, each ureter. So we've got a fibrous tissue layer on the outside, a muscular layer, so it's made up of smooth muscle, which is responsible for helping the urine to move towards the bladder via a process called peristalsis. So just like you've got peristalsis in your digestive tract to help food move down, we've also got peristalsis that occurs in the ureters to help the urine move from the kidneys all the way down towards the bladder where it's stored. So yeah, it moves by peristalsis. Another area that peristalsis occurs is also in the fallopian tubes of females when they release an egg. The oviducts or the fallopian tubes will move the egg towards the uterus via peristalsis. So there's other places that those wave-like muscular contractions happen. Anyway, back to the urinary system. So the bladder basically stores urine. It temporarily stores urine. It lies in our pelvic cavity. It's made up of 3 main layers: connective tissue, a muscle called the detrusor muscle. It's this muscle that contracts to release urine out via the urethra, and a mucosal layer, again, just a moist layer. When distended, the bladder rises into the abdominal cavity. So roughly, on average, it holds between 300 to 400 milliliters, but it can hold up to 700 to 800 milliliters. But then you start to experience pain and things if the bladder becomes too distended. So it's usually pear-shaped, but when it's full, it becomes more oval-shaped and it opens into the urethra. So micturition is just the process of urination. As the bladder fills and stretches, stretched receptors within the bladder send a signal, an electrical impulse action potential to the brain via the spinal cord, and then autonomic nerves are stimulated. So when you think autonomic nerves, think automatic. This is all happening unconsciously. We're not having to think about it. These nerve fibers send impulses towards the bladder, and this is what causes contraction of that detrusor muscle to sort of contract and push the urine out of the bladder via the urethra. So we have two sphincters, an internal and external sphincter. So the relaxation of the internal urethral sphincter, basically it's a reflex reaction. So when you are first born, you urinate naturally as soon as there is an impulse sent to the internal urethral sphincter. You will naturally just urinate because it's a reflex reaction. Your body just naturally does it when the stretch receptors, when it knows that your bladder has been full and the stretch receptors have sent a signal to the brain. So we learn to control that. So by the time we're, say, 18 to 24 months old, it's a learned response. We learn to control urination over time, but initially it is a reflex reaction. So the internal urethral sphincter just happens without us thinking about it. It's under autonomic control, but the external sphincter is under voluntary control. That's when we decide when we're ready to go to the toilet. So there's an awareness in the brain of a desire to pass urine, and then we'll be able to expel that urine. And like I said previously, if the bladder fills too much, then it can be quite painful. So the urethra, it's a canal extending from the neck of the bladder, and the length is different depending on whether you're a male or a female. So you can see the anatomical structure here, the male on the left, female on the right. The male urethra is roughly about 19 to 20 centimetres, whereas the urethra of the females is only about 4 centimetres. And the male urethra provides a common pathway for both sperm and semen. Semen and urine, I should say. But whereas the female is just a pathway for urine alone. So the internal urinary sphincter is under involuntary control, like I said, and the external urinary sphincter is under voluntary control. That's where we learn to control it over time. You can see, like I said, sperm and urine have a common pathway in the males here, and you see those little Cowper's glands at the top of where the urethra starts. When a man is sexually aroused, they release sort of fluid to help lubricate the urethra and allow the sperm to travel through unhindered. So here is a picture of the kidney. So the cortex area of the kidney is this outside layer. This is where filtration takes place, or ultrafiltration, you might hear it referred to as. And the medulla is where there's salt and water reabsorption happening. So blood enters the kidney via the renal artery over here. And so because it's an artery, it's blood that's oxygenated and it's being received by the kidney under high pressure. So that actually helps. It helps with the filtration process, which I'll talk about further on. So blood enters the renal artery. It goes through a series of processes: filtration, reabsorption, and secretion, tubular secretion, and then blood will leave the kidney via the renal vein. So the kidneys are dark reddish brown in colour. The right kidney is lower than the left to make room for the liver, like I said. They're bean-shaped organs, roughly about 150 grams each. They have 4 layers. The capsule is this fibrous layer on the outside of the kidney, which protects the kidney and helps give the kidney its shape. There's also a fatty layer. It's not mentioned here, but the kidneys are held in place by a fatty layer as well, to sort of cushion and protect the kidneys and hold them in place within the body. The cortex consists of nephrons, which is the smallest functional unit of kidneys, which we'll talk about as we go on. And this is where most of the filtration is taking place to help produce that urine. The medulla consists of collecting ducts, and that's where your salt and water reabsorption is happening. And all the urine gathers into the pelvis of the kidneys, which acts like a sort of funnel to collect all the urine before it's released into the ureter. And then it will travel from the ureter towards the bladder. So here is your nephron structure. So inside the kidney, we have roughly about between 1 and 2 million of these tiny nephron units in each kidney. So between 1 and 2 million, which is a lot. So this nephron unit is the smallest functional unit of the kidney. You can think of it like that, the smallest functional unit. So up in this area here, we have what we call a glomerulus. A glomerulus is just a knot of capillaries, or a network of capillaries. It's all these capillaries kind of all tangled together. Think of like a ball of wool. That's kind of where the name comes from. So I'm sure it's Latin for the glomerulus. It comes from Latin for ball of wool. So basically, they're all kind of knotted together, this knot of capillaries, and then they lead into, or are surrounded by, I should say, this cup-shaped structure called the Bowman's capsule. So it's here where filtration is taking place. Basically, the blood is arriving via the renal artery into the glomerulus, and there are lots of little pores called podocytes. Think of it like a molecular sieve, little holes in the capillaries of the glomerulus, and because the blood is arriving at high pressure, the blood is pushed through. So the liquid part of the blood, think about the plasma, is pushed through, but all the actual blood cells, the red blood cells, your white blood cells, your platelets, your clotting factors, large proteins and everything, all of that remains inside the blood. That won't leave at all. It's only like the small molecules, your glucose, your amino acids, urea, ions, things like that. Only small molecules can pass through those molecular pores like that are acting like a sieve. So it's just the liquid part of the blood that's squeezed through via filtration into the Bowman's capsule. So filtration takes place there. Then we lead off from the Bowman's capsule into what we call the proximal convoluted tubule. So proximal because it's the first part leading off from the Bowman's capsule, convoluted because it's all coiled, and because of its coiled structure, it's providing more room for absorption to take place, which is what's happening in the proximal convoluted tubule. But in this part, majority of reabsorption takes place. So like I said, we're squeezing everything out, good stuff and bad stuff from the blood, and then we're taking back all the good stuff that we want to keep and only leaving in the tubules the stuff that we don't want to keep, the waste products. So the proximal convoluted tubule carries out absorption, and then we have what we call the loop of Henle. So its main job of the loop of Henle is to concentrate urine. So there is water leaving by osmosis. It basically creates osmosis gradients. I'll talk about that on a further slide. Then we lead out into the distal convoluted tubule, which all collects in these collecting ducts. So the collecting ducts, we can only see one nephron here for simplicity, get used to the structure, but you can see these little branches here. You would have many nephrons attached to a collecting duct. So it's not just one like this. And then the collecting duct is basically where the urine will be and ready for release. So anything that's still remaining in the collecting duct to the end of filtration, reabsorption, and tubular secretion is ready to be released from the body as urine. So this part here, glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule and this proximal convoluted tubule and the end of the distal convoluted tubule, all of this part you will find in the cortex, that outer layer, this pink layer of the kidney. Whereas the loop of Henle, where water and salt reabsorption is happening, you'll find in the medulla part, this middle part of the kidney. So This is just a sort of blown up version of the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. Together, these two structures are referred to as the renal corpuscle. Renal just means kidney. So you can see that the blood entering the glomerulus is arriving via an afferent arteriole. So it's a branch of an artery. The artery branches into smaller and smaller vessels until eventually we get to arterioles. And I always think because it's afferent arteriole, I think A for arrive. And then blood will be filtered, ultrafiltration will take place, and you can see these little pores here. All the liquid part of the blood will be squeezed through into the Bowman's capsule, but remember, the blood cells and the large proteins remain in the blood. And then the blood, what's left of that blood will exit via the efferent arteriole. So think E for exit, efferent arteriole. And notice that the afferent arteriole has a wider diameter than the efferent arteriole. So this adds to the process of filtration. So the fact that blood is arriving via an artery is under high pressure, and the fact that the afferent arteriole where blood is arriving is wider in diameter than the efferent arteriole, all of this helps add to the pressure needed for filtration to take place and be so efficient so that the liquid part will be squeezed through into the Bowman's capsule. Then we'll have the liquid part of the blood in here, and the proximal convoluted tubule is the first part of those tubules branching off from the renal corpuscle. And notice that the epithelial cells lining the proximal convoluted tubule contain microvilli, these tiny little finger-like projections. They're called microvilli, and they help increase the surface area for reabsorption to take place all the way along the proximal convoluted tubule. So the nephron unit, it's a microscopic functional unit of the kidney. Microscopic just meaning it's so tiny we can't see it unless we're using a microscope. It's closed at one end and open at the other end. So basically it's closed where blood is entering the glomerulus and then into the Bowman's capsule. That's a closed end. It's not until you get to the collecting tubes that it's an open end. The glomerulus, remember, is just a network or a knot of capillaries all kind of wrapped together and tangled together like a ball of wool. The loop of Henle part sits in the medulla of the kidney. It's the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule, remember, that are in the cortex area of the kidney. And it's got many functions, including concentrating the blood, regulating our blood pH and our salt levels, and removing toxic waste, especially urea. So blood enters the nephron through the renal artery into the glomerulus, that knot of capillaries. It's filtered through into the Bowman's capsule. Things that are filtered include water molecules, which are tiny, urea, glucose, amino acids, and salts like sodium and potassium and things. Glucose is then reabsorbed with some water, so 100% of the glucose is squeezed out and 100% is reabsorbed back into the blood, because glucose is a really useful molecule for us. So some salt is reabsorbed and some water is reabsorbed depending on the body's condition at that time, whether we need salt, more salt and water, or we don't. So it just depends on the body's condition at the time, how much salt and water is reabsorbed. And it's controlled by osmoregulation, controlling our salt and water levels. So filtration or ultrafiltration, you might hear it be referred to. It depends, the rate of that filtration depends on maintaining that high pressure within the renal corpuscle. And the pressure, remember, is maintained for two reasons. It's coming from an artery, and the afferent arteriole is wider than the efferent arteriole. Filtration also depends on the structure of the podocytes, those pores, those little slits or holes that are acting like a sieve and allowing small molecules through, but large molecules like the blood and the proteins remain within the blood. And there are very many nephrons, so I said 1 to 2 million per kidney, to provide a large surface area for filtration to take place, which obviously makes the whole process more efficient. Tubular reabsorption, so most, up to 99% of the filtrate passes back into the blood. What's filtrate? It's basically that liquid part of the blood that's been squeezed through from the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule. Once that liquid part of the blood is in the Bowman's capsule, it's then referred to as filtrate. Sometimes glomerular filtrate, you'll hear it be referred to. So most of that filtrate passes back into the blood again. Some substances are completely reabsorbed. Like I said, glucose will take 100% back of that. We'll want our amino acids back as well. And others are not reabsorbed at all. So this process is carried out by the epithelial cells along the renal tubules. Most of it is occurring in the proximal convoluted tubule. Remember those little cells with the finger-like microvilli projections, which are helping increase the surface area for reabsorption to take place. And some reabsorption is passive, whereas some is active. So there's different ways that molecules will transport across membranes. Passive reabsorption will occur via osmosis for water molecules. So water molecules basically move from a high concentration to a low concentration down a concentration gradient across membranes. It will happen naturally. No energy is required. It's a passive process. So that's osmosis if we're referring to water molecules. If we're referring to any other molecule that doesn't require energy to move, we refer to that process as diffusion. So diffusion is the movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to low concentration down a concentration gradient. Basically, whenever there's a concentration difference between two areas, molecules will always try and balance out and equal and restore sort of equilibrium. So molecules always are trying to balance out. So if there's a high concentration somewhere, the high area will naturally move towards the lower concentrated area. But then other molecules will move against the concentration gradient. So they'll move from low to high. And if you're kind of fighting against the concentration gradient and going in the opposite direction of what's natural, then you will need energy. You'll need energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, to carry that out. And you'll also usually need the help of receptor proteins, I should say. You'll need protein pumps, like the sodium-potassium pump is a classic example. So we'll need proteins and we'll need ATP for energy to help move against the concentration gradient. So molecules are moving in a variety of ways: osmosis, diffusion, and active transport. So the loop of Henle part is where water and salt reabsorption takes place. So we have a descending loop of Henle, downward tube. I always just think of the vessel as a tube, and then the ascending loop of Henle leading up towards the last part, still convoluted tubule. So in the descending loop of Henle, this area is permeable to water. So water can enter and exit the descending loop of Henle. Whereas in the ascending loop of Henle, this area is impermeable to water. There's no water able to get in or out of the ascending loop of Henle. What's happening in this area, the ascending loop of Henle, is that salt, like sodium, is being actively pumped out of the ascending loop of Henle into the surrounding tissues. That means that the surrounding tissues are going to be quite salty, quite high concentration of sodium ions and chlorine ions as well. So it's really salty in the surrounding tissues, and that causes any water in the descending loop of Henle to naturally move by osmosis back into the bloodstream. So water is reabsorbed because of the high molecules want to move from a high concentration within the descending loop of Henle out into the surrounding area, into the blood capillaries by osmosis. I hope that makes sense. So tubular secretion, this process occurs mainly in the distal convoluted tubule. Unwanted material in the blood is added to the filtrate. Remember, the filtrate is what we're going to eventually release from the body as urine. Potassium, hydrogen, ammonia ions, creatinine, and drugs like penicillin are all secreted. This is particularly important in the maintenance of blood pH, which is usually around 7.35 to 7.45, and our urine is usually around pH 6. So tubular secretion, this process is really important for maintaining the acid-base balance of the body. So what is actually urine made of by the time we're ready to expel it from the body? 96% of it is water. Urea makes up about 2% of your urine. Uric acids and salts make up about 2%. If you've ingested any alcohol, drugs, or steroids or things like that, then traces of that will be found in the urine. And the colour of your urine is dependent upon fluid intake. So if you have drunk loads of water or loads of fluids, then you will produce large volumes of dilute coloured looking urine because you're well hydrated. Whereas if you haven't drunk for a long time and you're kind of dehydrated, then you will produce a really sort of amber, yellowy type looking coloured urine, and you'll produce small volumes of that. So the darker your urine, the more dehydrated you are, then the less water you have in your system. So osmoregulation, regulating our water and salt levels in the body. The minimum urinary output a day, minimum, is about 500 millilitres in a 24-hour period. But roughly, the average person, it's 1 to 2 litres of urine per day that we're actually excreting from the body. And we roughly go to the toilet, it depends what textbook or whatever you're reading, they say about 4 to 6 times a day, but everybody's different. And again, it depends on how much salt you've taken, how much fluids you've drunk, how hot it is. If it's really hot, you might obviously lose more water and things from the body. So osmoregulation is also controlled by a hormone called antidiuretic hormone, which gets abbreviated to ADH. This hormone, there's basically osmoreceptors in our hypothalamus of the brain, which are regulating our water levels all the time. And if anything's out of balance, then it will send a signal to the hypothalamus will send a signal to the pituitary gland to release antidiuretic hormone if we are dehydrated. So if it senses that we're sort of losing water, maybe we have been exercising or we've eaten too much salt or we're sweating a lot, it's a really hot day, then osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus will detect this change and send a signal to the posterior pituitary gland, and this will cause antidiuretic hormone to be released. It will travel all the way in our bloodstream down towards the distal convoluted tubule in the kidneys and the collecting ducts. It's here where the antidiuretic hormone has its effect. So nothing happens in the bloodstream. It has to travel all the way through the bloodstream and get to the kidneys, particularly the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting ducts. And it basically causes the collecting ducts to either, the antidiuretic hormone causes the collecting ducts to become more permeable to water, meaning that water will travel back out of the collecting duct into the surrounding blood capillaries, meaning it stays in our system. When antidiuretic hormone's not available, those collecting ducts are impermeable to water, and so it's sort of like a closed system, and the urine's just going to travel right out and out of our body, and we're going to lose water. So this just kind of summarizes what I've just said. Antidiuretic hormone, or ADH for short, regulates the amount of water reabsorbed by the kidneys. It binds to receptors on the collecting duct and it promotes reabsorption of water back into the circulation. So in the absence of this hormone, the collecting ducts are impermeable to water, meaning it's just kind of closed system. We're just going to the urine's just going to travel right out the urethra into the outside world. Whereas if we are dehydrated, we obviously want to hold on to that water. So this hormone basically stimulates the membranes of those tubules to release water back into the bloodstream. So drinking large volumes would result in diuresis. Large volumes of urine would be produced, and ADHD would not be released from the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. It's only released, this hormone, when we need to conserve water and reabsorb it back inside our bloodstream. So this just kind of summarizes this as a diagram to make it all make sense. So if we've got a deficiency in water, osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus detect this deficiency. It sends a signal to the pituitary gland, the posterior pituitary gland, to release antidiuretic hormone into the bloodstream, to travel down to the kidneys and have its effect on the distal convoluted tubule, or DCT for short, and the collecting duct. So it basically increases water reabsorption back into the bloodstream by making the membranes of those collecting ducts and the tubule of the distal convoluted tubule. It makes those membranes more permeable so water can be released out and back into the bloodstream. If we have drunk loads and loads of water or fluids, osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus detect that we've got plenty of water in our system. Antidiuretic hormone is not released from the pituitary gland, and then that means we've a reduced water reabsorption in the collecting duct and the distal convoluted tubule. It means that those the walls of those tubules become impermeable, and urine will just travel right back out. So that's basically it for the urinary system. You might hear it referred to as the excretory system as well. Just means the same thing, it's just another name for it. But hopefully you've realised that it has a really important function in the body. It basically removes toxic waste products, regulates our blood pressure, our salt levels, our pH levels, and it has vital functions within the body. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you've got any questions or anything, just leave some comments for me and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.